It's been nearly 2 years since a civil war broke out in Ethiopia after a massive fallout between Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, which governs the northern region of the country. In August, the brutal war flared up again, ending a 5-month truce. And on Tuesday, Addis Ababa released a statement saying it sees the strategic town of Shire in Tigray together with the smaller towns of Alamata and Korem. Shire is one of the region's biggest towns, and it's home to about 100,000 residents and 60,000 displaced people. Ethiopian troops now appear to be inching closer to the regional capital of Mekelle, which shares an airport and road links to Shire. There's been a longer history of animosity rather than friendship between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Asmara was locked in a 20-year border conflict against the then Tigray government, who ruled from 1998 until the war officially ended in 2018. That's when Prime Minister Abiy came to power and signed a peace accord with Isaias Afewerki, earning him the Nobel Peace Prize just a year later. But a civil war broke out in Ethiopia in November 2020. And the military, ethnic militias and troops from neighboring Eritrea joined forces to oust the Tigray rebel forces from their stronghold in the country's north. In late September, there were reports Eritrea was mobilizing its armed forces and calling up reservists between the ages of 40 and 65 to back Ethiopian government forces in their fight against Tigray. The US and the UK, as well as the UN, have all condemned what they describe as Eritrea's escalating involvement in Tigray.
Hostilities in the Tigray region of Ethiopia must end now, including the immediate withdrawal and disengagement of Eritrean armed forces from Ethiopia. There is no military solution.
Well, let's hear more now from Andebrhan Gargish. He's the author of Eritrea at a Crossroads, a narrative of triumph, betrayal and hope, and the former Africa Advocacy Director at the International Crisis Group. He's speaking to us from Brussels. Ambassador, it's good to have you on the program. Thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, I'd just like to unpack, why is Eritrea supporting the Ethiopian military in their fight against the TPLF?
There are actually two reasons. In the first place, there has been an unresolved issue of the boundary. When the Boundary Commission decided they delimited the boundary between Eritrea and Ethiopia in 2002, the TPLF-dominated EPRDF government in Addis Ababa has refused to implement it, and in fact went on to settle or establish new settlements on Eritrean territory after the limitation decision of the Boundary Commission. That's one thing. The second is, if you recall, after the change, when the TPLF was ousted from power and decamped in Tigray, there was the new prime minister accepted or agreed to implement the decision of the Boundary Commission, and a peace and friendship agreement was signed between Eritrea and Ethiopia, providing for security cooperation between the two countries. And a third factor is, of course, that when the TPLF launched this preemptive strike against the headquarters of the Northern Command in Tigray, Ethiopian Northern Command in Tigray, it also pursued the Ethiopian army troops that were fleeing into Eritrea, and in fact started attacking Eritrea. And so Eritrea also responded in self-defense at the time. We're all aware that there were also missile attacks against Eritrean cities in November 2020. So these are some of the reasons why Eritrea is involved in Ethiopian affairs. And it's really nothing new. Eritrea and Ethiopia have constantly been interfering in each other's internal affairs. From when Eritrea was annexed in 1962, the armed struggle started in Eritrea and cooperated with Ethiopian armed resistance groups up to conducting joint military operations inside Ethiopia, which culminated in the defeat of the Derg, the flight of Colonel Mengistu from Addis Ababa. And it was Eritrean troops, mechanized units that spearheaded the liberation of Addis Ababa in 1991. And some of these units stayed until 1995 to stabilize TPLF dominance and of the EPRDF coalition. So there is really nothing new in the reciprocal interference in each other's affairs. And Ethiopia, as a sovereign country, can invoke its security cooperation agreement to invite Eritrea to help it in a moment of need.
So then what does Eritrea stand to gain and to lose with their ongoing involvement in this conflict in Tigray?
In the first place, what is the main cause of this war? Why did the TPLF launch its preemptive strike on the 3rd of November 2020? Ostensibly to return to power in Addis Ababa. But that's impossible because as a former senior US official, the former Undersecretary of State for Africa, Mr. Cohen, stated, the rule of the TPLF was characterized as corrupt, authoritarian, and tribalist, and therefore there is no possibility of acceptance of TPLF rule in Ethiopia. That's then out of the question. The second is the project of Greater Tigray, the objective to establish an independent Tigrayan Republic carved out of territories from Eritrea and Ethiopia in violation of the territorial integrity of Ethiopia and Eritrea, which counters the African principle and practice of the inviolability of colonial borders. In addition, it would be untenable because neither Eritrea nor Ethiopia would allow parts of their territory to be carved out in order to create a new Tigrayan state with access to the sea, as the TPLF claims. So I think degrading the capacity of the force which presents an existential threat to its national security is one of the potential benefits of Eritrea's involvement.
And also, yes. Sorry, I'd like to find out how this is all actually affecting the people of Eritrea, because there has been this military mobilization to help this fight in Tigray, but this is a country that also has its own issues. So how are people in that country being affected by what's going on?
There is no question. The people of Eritrea, the people of Tigray, the people of Ethiopia as a whole are suffering from this war. In fact, the people of Eritrea have been suffering under a brutal dictatorship. And national service mobilization is not a new thing. National service was instituted in 1994. And although it had in accordance with the proclamation, it had limits. It was intended for just 6 months of military training and about a year of free national service. It has become indefinite, under the pretext that, of course, the no war, no peace imposed by the TPLF-dominated Ethiopian government represented an existential threat to Eritrea. So mobilization and, of course, forcible conscription as in the name of national service has been a fact of life in Eritrea, which, of course, has been we've been trying to actually reverse the making it indefinite. It should be executed in accordance with the legal limits set in the proclamation. So in Eritrea, it's not just the national services mobilization, but the utter deprivation of basic essential needs, essential public goods and services, which is the hallmark of the dictatorship in Asmara.
Yeah, a really difficult situation for people in that country. Ambassador Andebrhan, good to speak to you and get your take on that situation in Eritrea. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.